budget committee? Anything?
But the budget committee didn't meet, and has nothing to add except the number of financials.
Facilities grant committee.
Yes. And we talked about Creekside. I did include in our packets the cost review for Creekside. So you can give us an update.
Sure. Generally, I guess facilities, as Kathy was mentioning earlier, we're not talking about Creekside right now, we're also talking about the beach setup this year. So we've been in discussion with the Grace County and regulatory agencies about getting approval to hopefully do some work on the beach this year, because we have not done that in the past few years as a way to try to avoid spending additional money. So it's apparent, however, this year that because of the scour hole near the piers and the way the parking lot looks, that we're going to have to do something. So we're negotiating with the county, facilities committee is negotiating with the county staff about what level of permits are going to be required. So that's ongoing. Creekside, as we were just talking about, there's a groundbreaking that's happening on Thursday. The contractor will officially mobilize more like probably Monday of next week. They're putting temporary power down there within the next day or two, and we're getting ready to get started. So we have been, facilities committee has been working fairly tirelessly with the numbers and the scope of work and trying to kind of bring everything into a realm of that can kind of proceed based on where we are with numbers. So what's come of that is there have been ongoing discussions with other agencies. So currently, as you'll all probably recall, the redevelopment agency, former redevelopment, contributed almost $1.4 million. The open space district just signed a contract between the district and the board of supervisors on Tuesday, I believe, last week, for an additional $389,000. Tony Hawk Foundation is contributing $5,000. The Snow County Transit is, and these are ones that are still pending, but we've heard verbals on, are interested in contributing because there's a new bus stop that's going to be happening at the site, bus stop and turnaround. So they're contributing $40,000 or $50,000, and the Air Quality Control District is contributing another $45,000, and the Water Agency is also interested in contributing up to $100,000. We're working on the details associated with that. We also received an email this morning from the general manager of the Water Agency, who is interested in talking about future phases of the project, specifically about creek restoration. And the Water Agency apparently has some additional funds on hand to do creek restoration. They'd like to move that farther forward in the agenda. So that's something that we're also talking about. So ultimately, I think, Kathy, you were saying that you distributed through the board packets the description about the money, but that where we are right now is we will continue, it's a fluid process, and that number will continue to rise and fall throughout the course of the project, because as you uncover things you didn't expect, there will be a change order, and that ultimately will result in having to get credit for something else. So as we go back and forth, that's kind of the way the project works. So as it is now, and I don't have the number right in front of me, Kathy, but it's in the neighborhood of about $15,000 worth of the difference between what we have as pending funding, pending and approved funding, and what the contractor is, on board to do with the work. So the notice to proceed was issued via the Steve on 2 weeks ago, I think. So as I mentioned, the contractor is getting ready to mobilize. So that's kind of where we are. The number will, inevitably, there will be times when it will be over budget, there will be times when it will be under budget, and that's going to happen back and forth between now and the time that this project is done.
And construction is going to start Monday, February 18th?
Correct.
Wow. Great. And that meets, in theory, the deadline to be done by June 30th, with all things signed off and done?
So in theory, yes. And we had a conversation with John Hay, who is the former redevelopment manager, and he mentioned that on the 25th of February, the CASA Oversight Committee, which is the replacement for the redevelopment organization, is going to be reviewing the next ROPS, which is the approved funding, and it would be from July of this year to December of this year. He's already included Creekside Park in that request. It's just in case we need some flexibility. to explain why we're going past the, original approved deadline, which would be June 30th. One of the other things that we think is a possibility, we're asking for information about it, is that the skate park installer indicated that he might be able to improve his proposed fee if he had a little bit more time. So we don't want it to drag out any more than, we'd like it to be done on the 30th of June. But there's also a processing thing that is the notice of completion. It takes a month to process. So we're kind of thinking right now about requesting that we have an additional month that would allow them to complete their work, and we could be finishing the paperwork, basically. But we'll stay tuned, because, and Steve has agreed to come to the meeting on the 25th to have a face, to be able to explain why we're trying to do it, and why we need additional time, which is great.
Anything else?
And the next facilities meeting will be Wednesday, February 20th at 8:30.
Right.
Great job.
I think so. We are looking into doing a modification to the concession stand to put in an additional window facing the river. And so we'll report on that on Wednesday as well.
Is this part of your report or your
No.
after the meeting? Or we need to?
This is STEM.
Okay. All right, so is that it for your report?
Yeah.
Thank you. Person committee, we have a meeting and,
Do you want me to?
yeah, go ahead.
Chair?
Yes, please, if you want.
You are. So the Personnel Committee met today and had a good discussion about district job descriptions, compensation, summer personnel planning, looking at other best practices. So that was the agenda for the meeting today. And came to a couple different conclusions. One, we're going to be looking at the job descriptions for the maintenance janitorial services as well as for the two summer positions, and just tightening up the job descriptions, and Mary's working with us on that. As soon as we have completed job descriptions, we'll then also look to consider setting a pay range that might be more appropriate than what we've been paying in the past. In terms of summer personnel planning, there really aren't any specific conclusions about that, except that we'll anticipate going back to the individual who worked for us last summer as our beach manager. If that person stays in place, we'll just move forward with that and try to rehire some of the same kids, look for new kids.
Yeah, I think what we're saying is if they do a good job that year, then the next year they're the first.
First opportunity.
First opportunity.
Like first writer of people.
Yeah. So far, most of them who worked last year did a good job when I come back. So
Yeah.
we're looking pretty good.
And then taking a look at best practices to other districts, I think one of the things that the first I wasn't aware, but we were the only district left, and comparing ourselves to other districts that did nothing but pay our people. Like that's all we did for them. There was no holiday, sick, vacation, medical reimbursement. We just started reimbursing even the mileage driven on district time. And so based upon we're comparing ourselves to the Russian River Park and Rec District, which is the closest district to our size and scope. And based upon that, the Personnel Committee is recommending, deciding, depending on how that works, to start a small step toward employee benefits and offer 10 vacation days. This is if the person was 40 hours a week, and if the 1.0 FTE would get 10 hours of vacation, 10 hours of sick leave, mileage reimbursement, which the board's already discussed and approved. A partial compensation of their cell phone bill if they use their cell phone for our business, for district business. We discussed a medical stipend and decided not to pursue that right now, not to pursue any type of medical care. Those numbers then all tier down on a prorated basis to the number of hours, average number of hours a week a person works. So if a person's working 15, it wouldn't be 10 vacation days a year, it would be a prorated portion of that. And we really only have 2 staff that are impacted by it, but we all agree that it has almost no financial impact on the district legislature to make those decisions, to offer those benefits and perks to people, but it's a nice thing to do, particularly given that our pay rates are relatively low. The one that really does have a potential financial impact, though it would be minor, is the cell phone reimbursement, but we took a look at the telecom budget. It fits within our existing telecom budget to do the minor reimbursement of the cell phone bill. So it won't exceed our approved board budget to implement these changes. Anything else? Personnel committee?
Okay, so the last thing I guess is you keep your marketing public outreach committee.
Yeah, we're on. Okay. Yeah, this goes back over a year now, I think, that we first started talking about doing something to, well, let me frame it in terms of what you're hearing, the Creekside Park development and the further expansion of that. Nobody talked about LAFCO, but there was an ad hoc committee that we agreed to last time on being formed on LAFCO, so that might be coming about. The current state of our website is very small potatoes. I mean, it's minimal. It is doing just barely enough to get people to see what we have and so forth. But in looking at it, comparing it to other rec and parks around the Northern California area, both bigger and smaller, and the same size. Most of them were far more public-oriented. They had programs, they had events, they were a focal point for the community, and we're in a different situation. We're tourist-based here, whereas a lot of these ones that we looked at back then were residential. They were an area that was supporting its populace more than we are. But we're adding more facilities here, and if we expand our base through LAFCO, we're going to be having to offer things to Donovan's Mills and Villa Grande and places like that, which have facilities, programs, and we're talking about doing programs, and I think we're talking about this being a far bigger operation around here over the next 18 months, and certainly over the next 3 to 5 years. I mean, that we're trying to. And this is coming out of the Public Marketing and Public Outreach Committee. So we were looking to try and reach out to the public and provide something. And we came up with a list of half a dozen things, or a dozen things, that would make it better at servicing both the tourist viewers of the website and the local residents. Primarily the local residents. We really don't do too much for the local residents here. But everybody wants to do more programs. Everybody wants to do more things happening here and bringing people into this site. So that's where this is going. We outlined what Tia's going to run through is